this. Some of you are recognized from the last program that I presented here, where we did 30 different images of Spartanburg history, all with sort of random connections to the history of the county. This is a bit more focused, though. This is just going to be about the history of the Daniel Morgan Monument, and sort of by extension, the Morgan Square kind of area a little bit. I hope you'll enjoy this, and I have plenty of other presentations that I can do, and maybe I'll come back for a third round. So my name is Brad Steinecke. I work for the Spartanburg County Public Libraries. I work out of the Kennedy Room, which is the room where we have lots of historic collections of photographs and books and maps and other things having to do with local history and family history. So if you ever have any curiosity about something related to Spartanburg County history or upstate history or family history, we're the place to help you answer those questions. So this, as I say, is about the history of the Daniel Morgan Monument. But before we get to the monument that you're familiar with on Morgan Square, I'm not going to go so much into the story of the Battle of Cowpens, which is really how it all, the reason for the monument. But I will pick it up beginning with a flag. This flag in particular, which was the banner flag of Commander William Washington, who was one of the sub-commanders of General Morgan at the Battle of Cowpens. The story goes that he was visiting his fiancée in Charleston shortly before the battle, and her name was Jane Elliott. Among other things that they were discussing, she was wishing him well in his future endeavors as a battlefield commander. And she said that she wished his banner success. And he was a little bit embarrassed to admit, he said, "Madam, I have none. Like, I don't have a banner that is associated with my particular group of the war effort." So she took it upon herself to go over to some red damask silk curtains that were hanging in her home, and with a pair of shears, cut off a big square from those curtains and presented him with this and said, "Let this be your flag." So he took that on, and the flag got preserved. It was flown at Cowpens, at Guilford Courthouse, Hobkirk's Hill, and at Utah Springs. So all during the rest of his time during the Revolutionary War. William Washington died fairly early after the end of the war, but he and Jane got married. And she kept the flag in later years. Around the turn of the 19th century, there was a militia group that got started in Charleston called the Washington Light Infantry, named for George Washington, who was, I think, a second cousin of William Washington. But anyway, so Jane at one point presented the flag of her husband to the Washington Light Infantry for them to take charge of the flag and to preserve its memory. So the Washington Light Infantry from that point on gets associated with William Washington and with all the battles that he was engaged with, including the Battle of Cowpens. So for the 75th anniversary of the Battle of Cowpens in 1856, the Washington Light Infantry decides that they are going to go to the battlefield site at Cowpens and place a marker there. There had been really no visible recognition of the fact that there was a battlefield there until that time. So it's an arduous journey to get from Charleston to the Cowpens battlefield site in 1856. The train goes as far as just a little bit up above Lawrence, but they get off at Lawrence and then take a 4-day march with a wagon train up to the little village of Spartanburg, where they are honored with a reception. There are celebratory balls, lots of public speech making, as is the habit of 19th century gatherings. After a day or so in the village of Spartanburg, they move on to the Cowpens battlefield site, where they build a monument with some materials that they brought with them, but also things that they found on site there. This is the first monument that's on the battlefield there. And it's located where William Washington had first engaged with Tarleton's Legion. This is an image that shows the monument. This is it published in a newspaper very soon after the monument is dedicated, so it gives you an idea of what it originally looked like. And this is it by the 1920s. Mostly the same. The eagle at one point had been stolen, so they replaced it with a different eagle. And I think that the markings on some of these have been worn down and chipped away by this time. If you go out to the battlefield now, you can still see this monument out there, but it's in even worse condition than it was in the 1920s when that picture was taken. So there's an iron railing that was placed around the monument soon afterwards, and 1 acre of land right there was purchased by a committee of women in the town of Spartanburg, and then transferred to the Washington Light Infantry, given to them. Later on, that became the property that was owned by the Battle of Cowpens chapter of the DAR. But the night before the Washington Light Infantry was to leave the battleground, there were a number of them that were up late talking about the history of the battle and the passage of time. It had been 75 years at that point since the battle. And the conversation turned towards the future. 25 years from then, it would be the centennial of the battle. So the group of them there vowed that in 25 years, those that were able would come and make a second expedition and build an enduring memorial for the centuries, as they put it. They recognized that this was really all that they could put together for the 75th, but they had a grander vision for what the centennial could be. But of course, it's big differences, big changes occur between 1856 and 1881. There's a civil war, there's the Reconstruction era. As I said, the monument had been heavily vandalized. Many substantial, weighty things had occurred. And among that group that discussed that night, only one survived. His name was William Courtney. But it's probably pretty lucky that he was the survivor, because by 1881, he had been elected mayor of Charleston. So he's in a position of power and able to do a lot for that effort. So he and others organized a Cowpens Centennial Committee composed of people from Spartanburg County and Charleston County to work on what effort they're going to do to mark the centennial. The Spartanburg Town Council offers a sum of $500 and a place in their public square. It was realized that it would be ideal to place it in the context of a town rather than on its own out at the battlefield, because the older monument had been so heavily vandalized. And at that time, the battlefield of Cowpens was within the boundaries of Spartanburg County, which is why Spartanburg is associated with it, rather than Gaffney or Cherokee County, which didn't yet exist at that time. So they solicit assistance from the people of far and wide, and they want participation from each of the original 13 states to contribute to this effort, to be a part of the marking of this centennial. So they send out letters to the governors of those states, including the state of Tennessee, and their goal is to achieve a monument with a national character, is how they put it. So there are funds raised for a memorial column, and they secure a congressional appropriation of $20,000 for a heroic bronze figure of Daniel Morgan to be executed by one of the preeminent sculptors for outdoor monuments of the day, a man named John Quincy Adams Ward. There is Mr. Ward there. Other memorials that might be familiar to you, on the steps of the Wall Street Stock Exchange, there's a bronze monument of George Washington. He executed that. A lot of sort of heroic American figures from that were created in the late 19th century are his work. So the day of the battle is January the 17th, but they realized coming up to the anniversary that the statue wasn't quite ready, that the arrangements for the celebration would have to be delayed. So they had already set a backup date of May 11th, and they went with that. On the day of the dedication, May 11th, the houses and hotels of the town of Spartanburg were filled to capacity. It was said that you could walk around anywhere within the town the night before and see in every direction campfires set up in all the fields and hills where people were just encamped the day before. There was Spartanburg at that time was a town of only 3,000 people, but it was a total of 20 to 25,000 people that came to Spartanburg for this event. So this image shows the Morgan Square area. The Morgan Monument in this image is pretty much the same location where it is today. So this would be Magnolia Street leading off in this direction, and the square kind of all in the foreground here. This big building that's over there on the corner is the old courthouse. That's an 1850s era courthouse. And then you can just get the end of a hotel that was downtown called the Spartan Inn. But you see, there's a huge crowd that's assembled there. I have searched in vain for a photograph of this event and have come up dry so far, but at least I have this illustration that was published in a newspaper in New York a week or so after the event occurred. The reason it was covered in the New York newspaper and really nationally was because it was recognized that by the participation of all those of the 13 original states and the federal government, it marked a moment of national healing in a way. Those different levels of government had not participated in a collective project since the end of the Civil War. So those have been bitter years, obviously, during the war, and even the Reconstruction era was difficult for the nation as a whole. It was seen that this was sort of marking a moment of reconciliation among the people of the country. And today, even if you go out and look at the inscriptions that are on the sides of the Morgan Monument, it has that kind of a character to it. They're talking not only about the unity that had to occur to fight the Revolutionary War, but the ongoing need for unity in the future. So it talks about no North, no South, no East, no West, one country, one destiny. It says the men of the North and the South were fighting together. So there's lots of recognition on there that it's referring. You get the sense that it's referring both to the Revolutionary War and to the passage of the Civil War, the fact that it was over with. There were congressmen, senators, governors, dignitaries, from all across the country who came to this event. President Garfield was expected to attend also, but he was not able to because his wife was very ill at the time and he decided to stay in Washington. But he promised that the next big event that Spartanburg held, he'd be present for it. Unfortunately, he was assassinated and wasn't able to attend any future events in Spartanburg. There were major speeches by regional representatives. So rather than having a representative from each state speak, they had the New England states had a representative, the Mid-Atlantic states had a representative, and the Southern states had a representative. The Southern speaker was Wade Hampton III, who was a senator at the time, had been governor in previous years. The topic of his speech was Daniel Morgan as a general and what his battlefield tactics and what he was able to achieve in a military sort of sense, which would have been a fascinating thing to hear from someone who had a military command himself. This is another image of the event. This is a close-up of the courthouse. You can see back there. This appeared in Harper's Weekly. We've got among those dignitaries there and a sort of a stand that was built in front of the courthouse. No clear sense of who exactly that is, or if it's even intended to represent a specific person. But that's where the high and mighty would have been, and this is where the rest of the crowd would have been viewing the event. There we have there is General, then Governor, then Senator Hampton. The monument was based off of depictions of Daniel Morgan, specifically this engraving that's from the 1850s here. You can see he's got a deerskin frock that he's wearing. There's been some criticism about the hat that Daniel Morgan has in the monument. It doesn't seem to match up to any kind of hat that ever existed. But nonetheless, it's there. It's got a certain flair of its own. This is a portrait of Daniel Morgan made in later years. So this is how he would have looked about 1800, as opposed to the 1780s during the battle. Here we've got an original program from the event, a ribbon that would have been worn by a person of prominence at the event, and there were even special tokens that were minted for this event. It didn't occur to me to bring one, but I not long ago, within the past year or so, found one of those tokens for sale on eBay, and I got it. They minted two different varieties of them. There's one that's copper, and then one that's a highly polished white metal. It's not silver, but some sort of composite. But it's between $quarter and $half size, and that's the front and the back of it there. So let's talk about what happens with the Morgan Monument in later years. It's been placed on the square. What happens next? This is an image, really the first photograph of Morgan Square, and it's from 1884. So it's only 3 years after this dedication event had occurred. So it gives you a real sense for what the square looked like at the time. There's a iron railing in this copy of it. It's really hard to see it, but there's an iron fence that goes around the monument, I guess to prevent horses from coming up too close or wagons from running over the edge of it. But that iron railing stays there for many, many years. By the 1890s or so, they put a few cedar trees around it. Let's see if I've got an image of that. Oh, this is zoom in, where you can see a little bit maybe of that railing right wrapping around there. Oh, I don't have the cedars, but there are a couple of pictures that show the cedar trees that they place within the fence, and then larger trees outside of the fence. But those are removed by 1900 when they paved the square in brick. So at the time that they dedicated the Morgan Monument, there's a notice in the newspaper that from henceforth the name of the public square will be Morgan Square. But most documents still refer to that area as the public square or the courthouse square until the courthouse itself moves from off the square. And at that point, Morgan Square becomes the more commonly used term to refer to the area there. In 1899, there are some cannons that are added to the outside of the Morgan Monument there. Those are cannons that were seized in Cuba during the Spanish-American War, and they confused people in later years because one of them had a date of manufacture on it of 1862. And so people thought, well, anything that's made in 1862 has to be Civil War, but in fact it was not. These were in Cuba then. But they were, I'm not sure exactly who captured them and who was responsible for bringing them to Spartanburg, but it was the Upton Roper camp of the United Spanish-American War veterans that were involved in placing them beside the Morgan Monument there. And this image doesn't show it quite so clearly, but they had a stack of cannonballs behind each one too. Typical public space decorations a lot of towns had. So this is an image of it during World War II. You can see that it remains substantially the same up to that point. I think it looks like they've added, so they've added some lighting in the interval there. They put a bunch of street lamps around the square in 1919, and that's probably the date that those were placed there. And this gives you a better view of the cannonballs that are behind there. So they remained in place there until September of 1942. At that point during World War II, the Allied war effort was not going well. Like the Nazis were well into conquering Europe, and the Allied forces had not really checked them yet. So there was a nationwide scrap metal drive that they attempted to pull together any iron and copper sources that weren't being actively used. And the Upton Roper Camp, as the group that had donated these cannons to the square, they decided that maybe those cannons would be better used for the war effort. So they were loaded up into a truck and hauled off for scrap. Most of the downtown lighting, including those two lights beside the Morgan Monument, were also scrapped during that scrap metal drive, when presumably they were melted down for munitions. So this is how the Morgan Monument looks by the mid-1950s. At that point, even the iron railings that were around it for so long had been removed. I don't think, but past the horse and buggy era, I don't think that they'd served too much of a purpose anyway. You can still find pictures where people had climbed the fence and stood up on the little ledge there to either see a further distance or to give stump speech or something. So that wasn't keeping people back anyway, so they decided to do away with that. But there was so there was a city beautification committee that got started up in the mid-50s, recognizing, I guess, how much pavement there was in the downtown area, and they thought that it might be better if they spruced it up with some flowers and plantings. So they had a plan to pull up the concrete that was there and do some landscaping around close to the Morgan Monument. But there were members of the DAR that were actually opposed to this, and they felt that it was important to be able to walk up and read the inscriptions on the monument, and they felt that like excess plantings there would get in the way of that. So there was a compromise that was reached where they were going to have small redwood containers placed on the concrete there that would allow for some sort of plant life, but also allow people to come up close to it. But that little tiny battle, I can't even call it a battle, a little public discussion set the stage for what was to become the biggest discussion, the biggest argument about the Morgan Monument in its life, in its history to this point. There was a street plan that was unveiled in 1959 that totally redid the traffic flow of Morgan Square. The pattern is announced in August of 1959. It's going to allow for more parking, wider traffic lanes, but in the plan, there's no place for the Morgan Monument. It's left out of the plan entirely. Mrs. Paul Foster, who was at that time regent of the Cape Berry chapter of the DAR, went on record to City Council in opposition of this traffic plan. Her statement was that it took an act of Congress to place the Morgan Monument there, so it would have to take another act of Congress for it to move him. So that echoed a lot of the sentiment for the various DAR chapters that were locally too. The objection to this traffic plan was not widespread, however, in the town of Cowpens. The town council there quickly offered Cowpens as a new home for the Morgan Monument. They were eager to host it there if the city of Spartanburg would have it. Others suggested that maybe the battlefield would be a decent location for it. By that point, the National Park Service did have a small presence out there. It wasn't the large grounds that exist now, but they had where the visitor center and where the granite obelisk is was federally controlled Park Service land by that time. So they thought maybe that would be a place to move the monument to. And then a few days after this traffic plan is unveiled and the people are beginning a discussion about it, the Spartanburg Downtown Development Committee unanimously endorses the plan. City Councilman L.L. Hyatt goes on record saying, In all due respect to the Historical Society, I just don't see where we can put the statue on the square. At the same time, they're discussing the truck loading zones and bus areas, plenty of other accommodations for traffic reasons, but they just don't see the monument as being any sort of a high priority. There's a contentious city council meeting on October the 6th of 1959, in which the DAR, the SAR, and the CAR, the Children of the American Revolution, are out in force. Mrs. Stokes Smith asks how many of the councilmen are from Spartanburg, and only one of them was. Her response was, then you can't know what it means to this community. There's a person who, it says in the newspaper, they've torn down everything in Spartanburg that means anything, and now they're going to tear down the general. That quote is interesting to me because it occurs in 1959, which is well before most of the downtown area that would later get torn up. That hadn't occurred yet. So for her to say that they've torn down so much that means everything is an interesting statement. There's even a school teacher who points out that if you go to the Encyclopedia Britannica and you look up Spartanburg, it's an image of the Morgan Monument that's right there. So, so the opposition is widespread among a certain group of people. There's the county delegation, that would be the predecessor to county council, comes out in support of leaving it where it is. And on March the 2nd, 1960, they flatly reject moving the statue to any county-owned property. People had talked up to that point about moving it to the courthouse, and so the county delegation is saying that they're not going to cooperate with the city in this matter. There's another city council meeting in late March when Councilman Sam Mize makes a motion that they move the monument to the eastern side of the square if it doesn't create any kind of traffic hazard there. But the motion gets tabled while the council goes into a whisper session, and it ends with a unanimous vote. The issue has been settled. They've decided what they're going to do. They are going to move the monument to the downtown airport. That's their consensus there. So over the next several weeks, it's a hot issue around town. There's rumors of a court injunction that would halt the city council's plans. The Cape Area chapter regent notes that the Memorial Airport downtown is dedicated to the dead of World War I, and that a monument featuring General Morgan and the Battle of Cowpens would be incongruous with that dedication. SAR President Frank Wright comes out in favor of moving it to the new library on Pine Street, noting that it would be accessible to students there and a potential feature of the new Regional History Museum. So in fact, there is a court injunction that halts the plan in April of 1960. In May, the city tries to get the case expedited by moving it to the state Supreme Court. At a certain point, there's a question about the ownership of the square itself, whether it's county-owned or city-owned. They determine that it belongs to the city, so it is truly their decision to make. In the meantime, the library board responds to the proposal of moving it to the library with a list of conditions. First, they need permission of the county delegation. The county had said they wouldn't cooperate with moving it to any county-owned property, so they have to get the county delegation to support that. They want the city to bear the costs of moving the monument and to retain responsibility for any sort of care or upkeep for the monument. But the kicker is that they want the height of the monument to be shortened by 4 feet because they want it to be more compatible with the architectural proportions of the new library. There's one person who responds to that and says, okay, well, which end are you going to take the 4 feet from? It's also difficult because the library at that time is under construction, and it's not going to be feasible for them to move the monument onto a construction site. So it's going to need to go in storage for 6 to 8 months until the library will be here. So all this is complicating factors. Clearly, they don't have a good solution to this problem. But Sam Mize's suggestion of moving the monument to the eastern side of the square continues to circulate. The main opposition to doing that outright is that they plan in the future on widening Church Street, and they don't want it to get in the way of that future project. But on September the 6th of 1960, it's been a full year of debate. An agreement is reached. They're going to move the monument 100 yards to the eastern end of the square. The move begins on September the 13th, and it's completely disassembled and has been reassembled 4 days later on September 17th. We've got a wealth of pictures of them moving this. This has reached such a discussion, stage of discussion in the city that everyone was out there to take pictures of them actually moving it. There you have it. They had a crane come out. They didn't realize at the time that that the sword could be taken off when they would move the monument in future years, or move just the statue off of it. They realized that they were really in risk of it hitting something as they were taking it down.
Do you know why he wouldn't be in Revolutionary War attire?
Well, so he was, as a leader of militia men, they weren't outfitted with regular uniforms. So it was up to every person to pretty much supply their own clothing for it. It's a dress attire that he's wearing, but it's just in deerskin. The cut of it is fairly,
And the hat.
Yeah, the hat is just an odd feature for sure. The hat's not featured in any kind of engraving of Morgan. It's not particular to the Revolutionary War at all. It's purely the invention of John Quincy Adams Ward. But anyway, so I've got a few more images I think I can show you. This is when they have it in the new location there. It's interesting. They talked about there being a capsule where they deposited mementos when they dedicated this, but I can find no mention of a capsule at all when they move it. So I don't know what became of that. All right. So during all this attention to General Morgan, I'm not get there yet. Many remarked on how grimy the statue had become. I mean, it had been there, let's see, this is 1960. So, I mean, it got, 80 years or something. And it never really had a good cleaning. So there were a few people that defended the patina that General Morgan had achieved by this time, but most agreed that work was sorely needed. So the DAR put together an effort where they had scaffolding put up along it, and they gave them a sudsy kind of bath, but not like a professional sort of cleaning. It wasn't until 1987 that the statue would get its first proper restoration. There was a special committee that was organized, the Daniel Morgan Restoration Committee. All right, this is an image of the square in the early 1970s. Kind of gives you an idea of essentially what the 1959 traffic plan plus the widening of Church Street accomplished there. So the original monument, the monument's original location is in sort of this area, and they move it up to there. Another image there showing it up against the Belks building. Yeah, so there's what it looks like by 1987. Here they're taking it down off the pedestal to get a closer look. That's B.G. Stevens, the father of the library system director, Todd Stevens, taking a picture of it. So the Daniel Morgan Restoration Committee identifies a group that's able to do a professional restoration of the statue. They go with the Carcadulius Foundry in Cincinnati, which in their work there, they found that it was in remarkably good condition. There were a few small cracks and holes, but they subjected it to a tedious wire brushing and put on a protective finish. They also remark, as they're doing the work to remove it from the pedestal, that they're surprised that it had not been bolted to the top. They felt like that if there had been any kind of a traffic accident that hit the base of the monument, it really would have come down. Maybe even a stiff wind would have toppled it. So when they put it back in place in later part of 1987, they add some steel fasteners so that it's more securely put in place there. There we have it. This is in the late 80s after the restoration had been done in 1987. There's something else that they discover. So when they do the Church Street widening, they take off one of the bronze plaques. We can't quite see it in this image, but I think it's the one that was on this side of the monument there. They took it off and put it in storage in City Hall while the street widening was occurring, and then never put it back on. Years later, I think it's 1975, that someone is doing a room-by-room inventory of things at City Hall, and they realize what this plaque is and where it ought to be. And so there'd been a missing plaque off the Morgan Monument for 15 years, up to 1975, and they finally put it back on. So it remains at the Morgan Monument remains on that end of Morgan Square until 2005, when there is a redesign that brings it back to its original position. They take it back down off of the monument in preparation for that redesign, and Winston Wingo, who's a local bronze artist and does restoration work as well, did another cleaning and finishing of it. We were remarking earlier, it was in the entryway of the Art Center for about a year or so at that point. I was working in the Art Center at the time, and I remember walking up by it every day. It's very large. I mean, you get a sense for Mr. Wingo. He's about half the size of the whole thing, so I'm guessing it's a good 12 feet tall. And very, very finely detailed. It's a remarkable monument, very, very well crafted. So there's an image of the square all torn up in the summer of 2005. The new plan for the square calls for a little bit less parking, but a lot more green space and space that can be used for concerts and for other sort of public pedestrian assemblies. And that's an image of the monument as it is in place essentially today. I think that picture was taken about 2007 or so, and the trees have grown up so much since that time. So if you go out there today, so from many angles, you can't even see the Morgan Monument because the trees have gotten up so big, which is sort of it's a blessing and a curse in a way that you can't see it so well. But that's pretty much how it stands today. There are still discussions about if they ever were to change Morgan Square, what sort of placement the monument might have. There's sort of, it seems like a perennial discussion about where the general might go, which I think led to this editorial cartoon. It's the joke about they ought to put wheels on the Morgan Monument because they moved it so much. And you can tell from the discussion, there's plenty of discussion about them moving it, but really it's only ever been in those two different locations. So that is a condensed history of the Daniel Morgan Monument.
Well, they are talking about redoing the square, the area.
That's right.
And, it'll be a while because it'd be mega bucks to do that.
That's right.
So it may have to be moved again.
Yeah, I've heard that they like it so that they had a larger concert area, because the Jazz on the Square and Music on Main both, they fill up the square as it is now. And I think there are some modifications that could be done without the huge expenditure of money that they've talked about for a total redesign, but I think they're still ironing out the details on that. Well, thank you very much for your attention. Do you have any questions?
That's why in the world they keep moving me around.
They're just trying to find the right spot. Now, it moved originally because they had to change the street
They decided that the traffic flow was
The
inadequate.
traffic, they had to
Yeah.
do that first one thing.
You can see from that 1880s image, the earlier conception of Morgan Square was just a wide open, totally flexible space where people, it's the Wild West. You just go out there and whatever happens, happens. But particularly after automobiles, become widespread, it's just not practical for it to be a wide open space like that anymore. So they have traffic lanes, and then for a while there are delineated kind of park spaces on the square. But by the 50s, they just decided they needed more lanes traveling in a certain direction. And because the square kind of narrows down a little bit towards the end where the monument stands, it became a choke point there. And they decided they couldn't keep it there.